I'm the type of person, if you ask me a question and I don't know the answer, I'm going to tell you that I don't know. But I bet you what? I know how to find the answer, and I will find the answer.
Alright, Dave McCorge, it is of course Irish for a very warm welcome, my friends, to Shamrocks and Shanks. Another episode where we get to learn from some of the best professionals in the golf world. Now, my guest for this episode is Dr. Mark Bull. Mark is one of the premier biomechanists working in the game today, which basically means he's really good with looking at 3D movement and helping a player move better in golf swings. He's worked with and helped thousands of golfers from all levels, club golfers to major winners, and as far as I'm aware, there are very few who know more about how the body works in and out of a golf swing. For this episode, we explore the influences around movement for the club player and how understanding your own influences can be a big key in helping improve your performance and your golf swing. We chat about related movements in the golf swing and some of the discoveries Dr. Bull has been working on from a technical aspect in 2024, and he also brings us through some of the commonalities that the best movers in the world seem to display. For the coaching section, Dr. Bull provides some guidelines for those approaching with or working with 3D for the first time. We chat about his coaching discoveries this year and how they're based more perhaps on human interaction and learning or progression as opposed to technical aspects. We have a look at the Bull 3D system in action and look at some 3D tracings of movement. And lastly, Mark discusses his membership site and how to catalogue the site represents his view on important aspects to improving performance. Mark is without a doubt one of the smartest people in golf. You'll gain more information by simply being around him, which I've been very lucky to have happen in the last couple of years. His level of research, experience, time and dedication is elite and amongst the best in the world, and if you'd ask any coach, player or student that has worked with Mark, they'll tell you that it's his level of understanding of the golf swing is only matched by his level of commitment to understand the player in front of him. A man who is an expert in seeing movement from a 3D perspective, but committed to knowing what makes it work from a human perspective. I really hope you all enjoy this podcast because I think, as I said, Mark is one of the premier experts in understanding golf and golf movement. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Mark Bull. All right, Dr. Mark Bull, very warm welcome back to Shamrocks and Shanks. It's been a while since we had you on, so delighted to welcome you back, and hope everything is well right now, and we're going to have a good show. We haven't got this as scripted as I normally do because we know each other so well, so we don't really know what we're going to talk about, but we've got a bit of a guideline. But very warm welcome, and thank you for coming back on.
My pleasure, Steve, and thank you once again for the invitation. So delighted, happy to help in any way, and always enjoy speaking with you, so it's never a stress.
All right. So with the show, and you'll notice from previously being on and all the times that you listen to my other guests, which I'm sure you do, we split it up into a little bit of amateur golfers or club golfers first half and then coaching second half. So let's start off with those club golfers, and your expertise lies in, I don't want to pinhole you, and in fact, we have a question on this later on that piggybacks off this, but your expertise, so to speak, would be 3D and movement in the golf swing, and it spreads out over a wider scale of the human and so forth. If we were just looking at movement, and let's look a little deeper into movement, we have many influences on how we move. And if club golfers really want to change their movements, that's what they're doing when they want to improve their golf swing, I think they should have an awareness of those influences. So from your perspective, what are some of the main influences on how we move as golfers?
Well, that's a very expansive question in a lovely way. So we can kind of define that in a few ways. So you could say anatomically, why do people move the way they do? Conceptually, for example, why do players move the way they do? So those are two of many examples and many influences as to why, for example, players move and perform the way they do. Anatomically, for example, how they're moving within their frame, their concept around what is it they're actually trying to achieve. So as you know, that in many cases, actually what the player is trying to do is actually what creates the issue. I'm trying to move this way. Therefore, that may be then based on a concept and their intention or their perception is possibly then creating the issue. That really applies to everybody, myself inclusive. What I'm trying to do is actually the issue, is it invariably is. Then there's other things like the environment, their belief systems that you and I spoke off camera about, things like their coaching history, their movement history, so all those things. But typically, if you want to look at it around, probably the main two would be, for example, anatomically, how well they move as a human mover. Examples like the spine, the foot, the hip, for example, and or then just their concepts around what is it exactly they're attempting in their golf swing. So when you look at, say, that if you'd said to most recreational players, if we could just spend time around why you see it the way you do, so why do you believe X to be true in some ways? So when you look at physiology, Steve, it's very well defined. Our beliefs drive our behaviors, and our physiology is behavior driven. but our beliefs drive the behaviors we have. Some people very much truly believe X to be true, therefore their beliefs in the behaviors in life then really represent that belief they have. So what you look at with most there's actually every player, not just kind of the more recreational guys, is let's start to explore. Give an example, a guy I saw this morning, great guy, kind of 15 handicap, just really wanted to understand how he was moving more. And we spent a lot of time really just understanding really why he believed X to be true in some cases. And it really goes back to, what he's been told historically, what he's watched online, what he's observed through other players, for example. So what he's now trying to do in some ways is the fallout from the interaction of that, what he's been told by previous people. It's interesting, he kept saying, I've been told this. I said, well, that's, telling's not learning. And not once did you ever tell me what your understanding was. I mean, it's a lovely phrase within learning. It comes from a guy called Norman Doidge. It says, would you eat someone else's pre-digested food? And that invariably is learning. Someone else takes the nutrient value, the mineral wealth, and they leave you with the waste, the poo in this case. And that often is learning. Someone gives you their experience of what it meant to them, but there's minimal connection into that will mean the same to you, for example. So certainly for most recreational guys, let's just explore, without going into that too much detail, what are you actually trying to do? Why is the ball not doing what you want it to do, which is one of my favorite questions. Okay, everyone, I'm playing terribly, and well, okay, let's just look at what it is. The ball's not going where you want it to go. Let's go figure out why. And I find that approach can really soothe and desensitize in some ways players, that is just start to breathe out. Well, okay, what's happening now is, when we look at it with real perspective, is the ball's not doing what you'd like it to do. Let's go and understand why that is. And so that is a big one for me with as you said, the more kind of recreational guys, is what is it you're really trying to do? Where's this concept come from? Why do you believe it to be true, for example? And when we just start to explore and pick through that, then invariably that can be very liberating in many ways, and around just allowing the player to start to explore different ways of producing the ball flight that they like. And then secondly, tremendous one, and it's still one of the biggest reasons why, is the constraints upon our anatomy. So to give you an example, I have an historical foot and shoulder issue. It goes back to kind of boys' golf for me. Even as where I'm at in life now, I'm still trying to figure out ways of moving around a foot that lives in a very supinated kind of position. My foot kind of lives like this, and my shoulder is very compressed and forward. So a lot of my 3D data, to keep it on task about 3D, as you and I speak today, what my 3D data is really representing is how I'm moving around my foot and shoulder. So then you start to look at any measurement device, 3D, launch monitor, force plate, whatever it might be, even statistics in some way. What stats reveal within, say, statistics is the workarounds. That's the how they performed on the golf course, but it's how they've adapted for these influences and these constraints that are placed upon us. So when you look at any measurement device, what it really is revealing is how they're moving around those constraints. And that's when you look at it with context. Great, producing, for example, X amount of rotation or whatever, the pelvis is shifting, for example, one direction. Brilliant. Let's go figure out why. So I kind of say to most people, you can look at it in a very kind of like a three-way approach in some ways. What the 3D data will provide us is what you do. It gives us the framework in some ways, which we then would work within through discussion. We then understand why you do it. So in some ways, it's the idea of kind of knowledge and know-how. The 3D provides the knowledge, the information, but the end user gives it credibility through their know-how. How are you going to use the information? Examples being that you could get 10 wonderful coaches, all look at TrackMan or Foresight or Quad or whatever it might be the same way, but provide 10 different bits of feedback based on how they chose to see those values. So, and then once you've established why they do what they do, then how do you resolve this? Let's provide you with the resources necessary for you, not me, for you then to resolve this. So the kind of, the 3D provides the framework as to what you do. Steve is, in this case, your intellect and your know-how through discussion will then provide why they do it. To give an example of the guy this morning, goes back to a belief. I say to most people, hold strong beliefs very lightly. These strong beliefs we have in life about, I really believe this to be true, hold them very lightly. So be prepared to adapt. He had a very, very strong belief from a coach that he saw 15 years ago. This guy's 35, so probably a bit more like 20 years ago, actually, which he's still, that's in his reference system. 20 years on, his reference system against is this feedback helpful or not helpful goes back to a very strong belief, which he's held very tightly for 20 years. So he's referencing 2024 as you and I speak to, of course, he's speaking 2004. So that's what I'm very mindful of. And then you start to look, so it went back to belief systems and also a shoe design. He's wearing a pair of shoes. It just didn't help the way he moved anyway. So a lot of what he was doing through lower limb, foot and ankle and pelvis was trying to move around a shoe, which just simply didn't move. So you've got two very dominant influences, a very strongly held belief with a pair of shoes that simply didn't help him. The net fallout was he produced these 3D values. So you look at it that way. These are the values, but you always look at it for context. Okay, what's driving? What's the system which is producing those values? In science, they're often called mechanisms. What's the mechanism that produces testosterone, vitamin D, that kind of stuff? Within, say, more our kind of biochemistry and what have you. So I look at it that way, and then it's down to you then really to provide the resources to help to support in some ways the player to move that way. So the very short answer to that slightly kind of long response is two things you'd say to most recreational guys. Let's look at why you believe X to be true. Where's that come from? Is it helping? And then secondly, then let's start to explore more you, the human mover now, as to how the influence of life in some ways in the spine and what have you, and maybe influencing what you do. So most players explore those two areas. Why do you see it that way? Where's that kind of belief come from? What other ways can we start to approach, for example, say club delivery in this case? And how is your frame allowing you to, in supporting you and moving that way? You start to explore those two, and invariably then that's a very, very powerful place to be as far as improving how they move.
So when we're looking at that, and you're talking about this player that you worked with this morning, and you're like long held belief 20 years ago. Yeah. And there's a phrase that you use sometimes when we chat is, a child doesn't need to know how the kettle got hot. They just need to know it's hot, not to touch it. Yeah. So when we're working with a player or trying to change, or a club golfer in this case is working on their own swing, is it necessity that they need to understand the exact reasons why they're doing what they're doing, or do they just simply need to know what they need to do to improve?
Yeah, I think.
Or does that change? Does that change from person to person? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it as always. We are case studies of one, as you know from historical discussion you and I have had. What player A responds to is very different to player B. One person's disability is another person's ability. All that kind of stuff you acknowledge. So for sure, you look at the individual response, and so allowing for, we'll keep it somewhat light today as we speak.
Yes.
Real precise. Around. Otherwise, it'd be an encyclopedia of listeners, which I'm happy to do, by the way. And so what you look at is the brain is always doing something called forward planning. So you look at our brain's evolution; it's really based on where and what next. Do I breathe in? Do I breathe out? Do I drink? Do I go to the toilet? Do I eat? Do I sleep? And there's always kind of where and what next to the brain. And so what the brain's saying is, okay, how do I get here from there? So to get there, how do I get there from here? So still, in some ways, the best model one could suggest is a white blank sheet of paper. Steve's here. He wants to get there. So how do you fill the gaps in? So you could argue in some ways it's no different to say how a GPS works in a car. You put the end coordinates in, and it maps the movement based on where it needs to get to. So in some ways, the end defines the start. So what I say to players is, how do you put that into a playful language? Don't tell me, show me. Show me what you need to do to best deliver the club that way to produce the ball flight you're trying to produce. And you still, even for the, I wouldn't say reluctance or stubbornness, not as in personality, but the stubbornness within their movement systems. They're called stubborn movements within movement. Some movements are just very hard to shift for other reasons. You still rarely find someone that doesn't know intuitively how they'd like the club to move to best produce the ball flight needs. So I'm very much around that. Don't tell me, Steve, show me. Show me what you've done in the last, just say, X amount of weeks, for example. Just show me how you've adapted what we discussed. Show me your response to that piece of feedback. Just kind of walk me through you understand in the last few years. I'm always around, my approach is to extract, as you know, rather than to provide. So we're all trying to get feedback, extract in some ways, which is really based on how you frame the question. So you say, okay, just show me then, based on the 3D data and what you discussed and kind of what you decided to kind of explore, based on what you now know, show me how you'd like to move to best produce X. And you rarely, Steve, even, I say in the most fun way, my brother is a 20 handicap. He gets an hour a week at best to do any kind of practice to support his golf. Just a very busy guy. So in that 1 hour, he has to use it very, very well. So he would be, like many recreational players. They play once a week if they're lucky. If they're very lucky, they get 30 minutes to hit balls at some point during the week because of the commitments of life. So that was very mindful of. But even allowing for all this, you rarely get anyone. If I say this to most people. Spend more time on day one to kind of avoid spending more time on day two. If they really understand, the problem they're trying to solve, you kind of really never have to provide an answer. So I'm very much around that. Spend all the time you need, really understanding what is it exactly we're trying to do, what is it exactly you need to do to resolve and produce whatever it needs to be. So the more time you spend on the question, the answer just kind of emerges. Unfortunately, many guys go straight to the answer or an answer rather than the answer. So the more time you spend exploring the question, the answer will just organically appear. So I'm very much around that. And again, you've been around a few sessions that we've done, and I'm not saying in any way my approach is right. It's just the way I like to do things, and that's really come from. You look at it as a real trade within performance between evidence and experience. And I'll expand on that for you. I know many guys, Steve, with great evidence, but have no experience of helping players. I know many, maybe your first coach would be a good example. They've got great experience around helping, but no evidence to support that. So the needle's always doing this. So certainly in my experiences, people invariably respond nice to that approach. And okay, it needs refining, it needs adjusting, you need to kind of make it more precise, but the coarseness of the movement is there. Show me, if you're trying to produce that ball flight based on how you currently understand how you move and why the ball is behaving the way it does and how the club is being delivered into it, for example, show me how you'd like to stand, how you'd like to move to then best resolve this. Most people, like my brother, for example, would do a pretty good job at showing you how to do that. Now, as a coach, then you would then start to refine it, make it more precise over time. But yes, I'm very much around that. Don't tell me, show me. I don't need to hear what you've done. I need to see what you've done. And they often get a very different response. And you look at, say, you've done your homework. Yeah, I've done that. Show me what you've done. And yeah, we've all been there. So I'm very much into that. Don't tell me, show me.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, from the sense of what you're saying, there's more of an involvement of the player in the improvement process. So they're having to get more involved, as you said, show me, demonstrate, which I think is a really, really good way to look at it. I think even kind of moving on, we recognize that there's a lot of cross pattern movement happening in golf swings. And what I mean by that is when one segment is moving one way, the other segments may be moving the other to counterbalance or counteract. I think when club golfers look to, as you said earlier on, an answer versus the answer, they very much singularly focus on one segment. So, it's my lead wrist and I need to put that into flexion, or my elbow needs to go here, or my shoulder needs to go here. When we're looking at those cross-pattern movements, is there one in particular that jumps out to you, say, well, we know kind of the pelvis would be very central to how we move. That lead hip for most golfers would kind of be the GPS, so to speak, maybe, or even the pelvis. Is there any connection in the golf swing that you feel stands out between pelvis and trail elbow, or trail hand and lead foot, anything like that players would maybe be, let's say, advised to be aware of?
Yeah, if you take, let's take a somewhat kind of end of year approach as you and I record this. So, you've heard me say in the past the one needle approach. If you had one needle, like in the form of acupuncture, kind of how would you use that one needle? You'd say kind of lead foot, trail wrist. That lovely, as you said, that they're called contralateral movements, opposing movements, as opposed to something called ipsilateral, which is on the same side. So contralateral patterns are opposing movements. It's often referred to as pollination. Within, say, skill acquisition, you can take, say, movements and rugby, from cricket, from NFL, from football, for example, and they pollinate into an opposing sport. So pollination, cross patterns, I mean, it's the same thing, just often defined in different areas. So massively, if you want to take that one needle, just do one thing well. I'd look a lot around the lead foot and hip, sorry, lead foot and ankle, my apologies, alongside the kind of trail hand and trail wrist. So in some ways, you've got the most distal lead side segment and the most distal trail side segment in the hand and the foot. That lovely cross pattern of movement of the. So again, it's one of those. Take this for what it is, Steve, and a lot of guys often then. These are guides, not absolutes. Unfortunately, most people take these comments that someone like me were making. It's an absolute. These are guidelines. They're suggestions. They're not absolute belief systems. Invariably, if the lead foot moves well, anatomically, and the trail wrist moves well, yeah, you're pretty much there as far as backswing. You can then invert that for, a little bit for downswing, but that lead foot trail wrist is moving well. Yeah, again, that's the framework of perhaps what many people would aspire to do, regardless of their belief systems again.
Okay. That's a really, really good one. And again, as you said, we're trying to keep this as, we could go as deep into the woods as we'd like today in talking about this. But again, the idea for this first section is for club golfers to maybe even just open the door of understanding. That'd be a great result from today's podcast, that they go investigate these things a little bit more and see how it applies to them. From a 3D perspective from yourself, obviously we mentioned earlier on, you're working with elite movers throughout the season and every range of movers, every level of movers, I would say. From those elite movers, are there any commonalities we might see that maybe the club golfer, physical restrictions withstanding, might look to maybe improve in their own swing? So do we have certain things like, I know hand height at certain positions in the golf swing is something we kind of discussed, has been mentioned before. Are there some of those similarities that you see in the best mover? So, there's been maybe a trend towards looking at what everybody does differently. But can we look at similarities maybe and help players out that way?
So as you know from bits you've heard me say in the past in discussions we've had, I look to see what connects players rather than what separates. We don't need to go into the history behind that so much today. But I look at what through lines, threads display in most players, regardless and despite their belief systems, their movement history, their coaching background, the environment. Are you born in Orlando? Are you born in the west of England like me? Doesn't matter. Despite all of these influences, you see these through lines that display in most players. And a good example is someone like Scotty Scheffler. His footwork gets so much attention, why it's a very cool story, but his pelvis and other areas move the same as most people. But that's a very dull story. Look at Scheffler's trail shoulder. It does the same as Rory. Dull is a story, but his feet makes a nice story. So that you look at it and okay, fine, whatever. It's a romantic, but I get it. I appreciate that. So for sure, I call them performance markers, and they're very different to say segmental movements. So invariably, when you look at, say, as you know, you can be very divisive in a lovely way with 3D data. You can look at segmental movement, the ranges, the interaction of the segments, the accelerations, the decelerations, all that kind of stuff you can look at within segmental data. I actually, where I'm at as you and I speak, I actually look less at segmental data now, unless it's a very defined question, often pain. I was in Zurich on Sunday with two players, two very good players that are back in Switzerland for the Christmas, and they both have been experiencing pain. So that's a very different, definitely. We need to explore now why they're experiencing pain. But typically what I spend more time around is these performance markers, which are typically what you see in most of the advanced players, despite those influences. As you say, things like the hand position, but I'll give you some kind of newer ones I've been looking at really the second half of this year, around the kind of how the lead shoulder moves. So again, we'll kind of bookend it in some ways today. As you know, I like bookend things. If we get that, we need to do this. The stuff in the middle kind of resolves itself. And too many people I find get lost in the stuff in the middle. Ball doing this, the club's doing that, a wrist is sore. He said, oh, it's just, yeah. You say, okay, just pause and let's just bookend this. You'll get that when you get this. This will kind of, again, organically just kind of find its way. Players like that. Okay, so if I do that, I'll get this. And that's not a reductionist view. I'm not a reductionist. I'm the opposite. I think when you heavily filter, you also remove the good stuff. So filtering, like a form of, it's quite homogenous in some ways. When you make everything the same, you lose the good stuff. You lose what makes Shane Larry, which I adore Shane. You'd lose those people when you make it so clinical. You wouldn't get the Shane Larrys, which I think when he's on, good luck beating Shane Larry. I think he's such a wonderful player. And so there are these movements. So the left shoulder, where's the lead shoulder impact relative to its start position? You rarely see on the 3D trace any stage in downs when the shoulder gets excessively ahead of its start position into a point of impact. So if you look on the trace, it kind of almost somewhat kind of traces itself back and down. Another one I look at a lot is the concept of kind of the pelvis rotation relative to its lateral side bend. So I kind of call it 0-0. And this is, again, take these as guides, not absolutes. They are not rigid markers, as some people think, okay, I have to do this. No, just apply some intellect to this. These are guidelines, not you have to be there, that which is most people. They've lost the ability to think for themselves, unfortunately, many people. So they have to have their hand held and to be told what to do. Around about lead arm parallel downswing, for most players, the pelvis is around about 0 rotation. So when we look at, say, the health of the spine, in particular the lumbar spine, those vertebrae, coarsely speaking, L1 to L5, like being stacked, a bit like kind of 5 golf balls on top of each other. When the pelvis gets to 0 rotation, is also 0 side bend. And that's a marker I look at a lot. And great movers, if they rotate their pelvis into downswing, when they get to 0 rotation, crudely speaking, when it's square, it's also level. Often what you see in a lot of players, especially in adolescence, for many, many different reasons, which connect back to the growth cycles, they're very up in that trail side. So one side of that spine's being compressed, the other side's been exposed to excessive length. And probably the third movement I look at a lot is how the trail elbow relates to the pelvis. Now, this is a one I would encourage people to explore themselves, because trying to show on videos you and I record this is somewhat challenging. So again, to any of your listeners, explore it, make your own understanding rather than try and have me show you. As an impact, the middle of the trail elbow is in line with the middle of the pelvis. Again, for those that wear trousers or pants in Canada, for you guys, look at the stitch in the back of your trousers. I'm English, Steve, we're talking English today.
Yeah.
Stitch in the back of your trousers.
Slacks.
I'm not that old. The stitch in the back of your trousers, the middle of the elbow would be in line with the stitching of your trousers at impact. So often I can just kind of maybe zoom out if you are showing this on. You get guys that kind of move a bit this way.
Yes.
But impact with the elbow, be coarsely speaking, middle of my pelvis at impact. So those are 3 markers I look at a lot. They're add-ons to the bits that you and I have looked at in the past historically. And again, you look at it 2 ways. I'm always trying to find reasons for something to work. And equally, I'm always trying to find reasons for it not to work. And that's a very healthy use of science. Can I find a reason? Can I really, how robust and durable is this approach? Let me try and find reasons for it not to work. And if I can't break it in some ways, that's a pretty robust approach. You rarely see, again, unless there's a very defined circumstance and there's a context and you know why, which unfortunately is often lost in most discussions. You don't really know why the player is doing this. You rarely see in the most accomplished players those 3 movements to be significantly off. So the lead shoulder will never move excessively ahead of its start position until point of impact. 0-0 the pelvis, which really is the spine is being stacked segmentally. And often you look at players that experience spine pain, which is a whole different discussion across so many areas. But again, being very coarse in our feedback today, often there's a disruption in that 0-0. They're often up on the trail side relative to that 0 rotation, and or impact, the elbow is behind the middle of the pelvis. So typically when you get those 3, those markers somewhat aligned, invariably allowing for all things, it's a good day. It's a very good day.
Yeah, I like those. It's a very good answer. Some really, really good stuff there. So again, as we said, just, coarsely going through it to give players some idea of some things they can look at. And I think anytime you get that new information or new perspective, it can make the journey a little bit more fun. Because one of those conversations is around golf coaching and golf improvement. We're not really changing what the good movers really did. We just know more ways to describe it. And everybody needs different verbiage, different cues, different imagery.
And apologize if you jump in, apology, but I think this might add some more value. So apologies for me jumping in there.
No, it's fine.
look at it in three ways. And again, allowing for the context of the question, hey, how can we help, and what is it exactly you'd like to explore? So allowing for all individual feedback on that. You look at it three ways. Are we trying to change how you move? Less so. Are we trying to improve how you move? Actually, less so. We're trying to improve the performance of how you move. Absolutely. So what I look at in players is not so much improving what they do, but improving the performance of what they do. And that's a very different way of framing it. Let's look at how the way you move performs and behaves. Is it performing in the way we'd like it to perform? Are you durable? Are you robust? Are you predictable? Are you reliable? Are you adaptable? Are you pain-free? If you kind of say yes to all of those, that's a very, very high performance approach. So I look at movement performance. I don't necessarily look to improve. I can improve your spine movement, but you can't perform. You know, you've heard me say in the past, the idea of de-skilling, that the data gets better, but the player gets worse. That's a very, very common observation when you're looking at, say, golfers of any status, whether they be a recreational player, an aspirational player, or a major champion. They often improve segmentally how the wrist moves or what the club's doing, but they can't perform anymore. And I think we all know examples of players that have taken that approach. It hasn't always kind of ended nicely for them for whatever reason. So I'm very much around that. How is the way you move performing based on the context of what is it you're trying to do, the demands of the task, all that kind of stuff. So I'm very much around how do we use then the information we have to look at the performance. And so if you improve the performance, then clearly there'll be markers that represent that. Whether it be club speed or pain avoidance, or still the most important marker in golf, which is scoring average and what have you won. Unfortunately, I get quite many. It's staggering now. I find it staggering. I mean, I need help with this. I've been to a few places in the last 6 months where their marker for performance is club speed, which I think is just staggering. I mean, so okay, you move quickly, but show me what you've won this year. Oh, I haven't won anything. Well, how's that a performance model? That what they now look at in some approaches to, say, selecting players and profiling players, or defining a player now as club speed, which I think is just intellectual madness. What's your score on average? What have you won? Show me what you've achieved. For me, that's performance models. I'm sure I'll go back to Shane Lowry again. He's not the quickest player, but he's done all right in life. Okay for himself, and yeah.
Yeah, I had a junior player who's, looking at scholarships, and talked to one coach, and the very first question that I was asked was, what's your swing speed on driver? What's your swing speed, ball speed? But again, that's putting demands on then junior players to get faster and faster and faster beyond where their body might be to support that action. But that's a whole other.
Yeah, sorry to jump in then, because I've really, this is a big area for me, and it's still my great love is adolescent players, because you can really hopefully influence these guys for life, like your first coach who spent some time with Sue. You often put these adult regimes and our expectations on adolescent humans, and that's ethically for me not correct. You put adolescent expectations on adolescent players. You don't put a 25-year-old's expectation on a 15-year-old female. So you wonder why so many guys, unfortunately now, it's always been normalized. And again, I really say this as a great defense to adolescents. It's been normalized now within some areas to have a condition. Or what do you have? I have a stress fracture. What do you have? I have a wrist issue. They've normalized that. It's like, no, I spoke at an event recently and the audience went silent. I said it's absolutely not normal unless there is an absolute real trauma to have stress fractures at 20 and to have wrist surgery at 15. That's not normal. Normal is getting to whatever stage in life. Just say my dad, 86 as an example, normalizes being 86 without medication, without any support system. That's normal. My dad, no medication, doesn't need any support. He kind of walks everywhere, does his thing. That's normal. Not what medicate. Okay, this is, there's situations where it's needed for sure, and I absolutely support that. But I'm talking about the context of golf now. It's been normalized that you have surgery at 20, you have a stress fracture. No, you do not. Normal behavior is you get to, whatever stage in life, you say they're 15, how you doing? Yeah, I'm all good. That's normal. So unfortunately, a lot of these have been normalized now because it's so frequent in younger players because of what they've been exposed to, what they're being asked to do, without any consideration to how they move to produce these speeds. I was at a place recently, it was a great college, in fact, one of my favorite places to visit in the US. I love going out with the guys, and they just see it a bit differently, thankfully. It's look at how they're moving to produce these speeds, not just what club speed you produce. And I can name that. That's Mitch at the College of Charleston. I'm happy to say that. Wonderful guy, Mitch, comes from a great background, fantastic program. And they look at it that way. Let's look at what they're doing to produce this, not what's your club speed, which is, I get it. I see the value in it, and it's tremendously valuable. Of course it is. But again, it's the context. What are you doing to produce? It's like, those that are trying to actively lose weight. We can all lose weight, but there's different mechanisms we can use to lose weight. Is one sustainable? Is it healthy? Is it ethical? Or is it the opposite of those three? You get the same net, but at a very, very, I say to everyone, there's a cost of business always. There's always a cost of business. When I went to Charleston, I went to the US for a day, believe it or not, from England. I flew there and back with the same crew. I was wiped out for 3 days. I was just in a mess. That's the cost of business. So you say to every player, there's never a solution, just a trade. One of my favorite questions, I don't want to digress too much for you today. So one of my favorite questions to every player is, especially in aspirational players and tour players, is what are you prepared to give up to win? And most guys look at you blank. So only you can stop you typically. What are you prepared to give up to win today? Oh. And that is in essence what's needed. What are you prepared to give up to to win the Open Championship?
Yeah.
They look at you in silence. That's what I said. Once you take your time to explore that, and once you answer that question, then you'll start to figure out what you need to do. So, what are you prepared to give up to be the world's best coach?
Yeah, very true. Interesting. Yeah. I have to think about that. It's really interesting. I've frequent conversations with a coach for the Arizona Diamondbacks from a baseball perspective, and he's a pitching coach. And he said something very similar last year. We were having a conversation, and it was around Tommy John surgery. Yeah, and he was shocked at how the norm was now. Tommy John surgery wasn't a big deal anymore. And he was like, I'm getting really worried that you're seeing at 21, 22, 23 years old, that kids are getting these things done. And it's become the norm. So kind of same principle. If we were to delve into the coaching side of things, and I think we've kind of stepped a little bit in that pool anyway with what we've been talking about for the last couple of minutes, which is perfect. There's been a large influx of apps, devices, etc., that produce 3D data in the last year. Now, we're not going to comment on every device, none of that. I just want to know, would you have any guidelines for coaches that are approaching or coming across that data for the first time? Whatever system they're using, it doesn't really matter. What are some guidelines you would want to put in place? So for me, from my perspective, would be accuracy, and accuracy in itself could be defined in many different ways. But that'd be one of the guidelines that I would insist if a player is looking at 3D data. And then from what I've learned from you about it not being really the number, more the shape of the movement rather than the scale of the movement and so forth. What would be some of those maybe guidelines you would encourage coaches to move along when looking at 3D data for the first time?
I think any device, Steve. I mean, motion capture systems, anything really. You look at it two ways. What do you buy? What do you want from it? And what are you trying to achieve? So what are you buying it for, and what do you want from it? So that's always the approach you take. What do you want out of it, and how are you trying to use it really? So once you've answered that, so for some people, having a single sensor tracker can be very helpful. That's just what they want to use it for. How do you want to use it? What do you want out of it? Some guys need a more complex system because they want different things out of it. So I think as long as you know in advance, what am I doing it for? What do I want from it? How do I want to use it? How do I want to use this device? And what do I want to extract? In some ways, that will then guide you. Then I'd like to look at all the markers available and really explore this to the best that I can. Then for sure, then you're often moving that direction versus, do you know what? I just want to look at it quickly on the range, give you a bit of kind of loose feedback. Fine, that's all good. Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. So, and then you've kind of rhetorically answered that question beautifully there. That I look more at the shape of the movement rather than the actual values itself. Again, allowing for individual context. I don't say they give no value, but I look at how do these values fit within what the player's trying to achieve within their performance, constraints of their anatomy, their physiology, for example, and all those areas. So again, the idea that there's good and bad values just don't exist. For every player that moves that way, I can show you one that moves that way, and they both perform. Go back to that performance model again, wonderfully well. But then, for sure, there are normative examples that we know that certain joints don't like certain movements. I'll give you an example of a young lady I saw in Zurich on Sunday. They just had wrist surgery. The wrist doesn't like extension coupled with radial deviation, especially in transition. So it doesn't like that move in transition. Which then you look at, there was a phase around about the COVID time where that was being encouraged by many, and you look at it and go,
say that.
So what? No point. There's no value. Again, I would achieve what? Stress. Well, I wouldn't get stressed because I
crush your lunate bones, probably.
It's not my thing, and I don't look at it. Like, whatever, you do what you need to do. There was a time where that was actively encouraged by many, thinking, okay, maybe this needs explaining to me. If you know when you move that way in transition and actively compress scaphoid, as you said, the lunate, the connective tissue, for example, when it goes into extension radial deviation, why would you do that? But again, whatever, golf has its thing every year. That was just the thing at that point in time. Mm-hmm. And what they never tell you, these guys, is the fallout. For every player that does nicely, it gets posted online. There's hundreds that, unfortunately have a bad experience, but those are very conveniently kept offline. I had it with a friend of mine a while ago. I had to laugh. And I said, take this in the mail. It's meant to come across. You post every week around one of your guys does well. But he lost his card last week. Why didn't you post about that? Because you was involved in that. And he went, whoa. So I said, you actively post online about when he does okay, but he lost his card and you was involved in that process. So shouldn't you post about this? And he just went very silent on me, because you got to apply logic the same way. As you can't select whatever logic you apply that way must be applied the same that way. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen anymore. So I would look at that with these younger guys. Mm-hmm. What do you want? What do you want from it? How do you want to use it? And then just again look at the context. What are they doing? Why are they producing that value? In this particular lady's case, it did go back to she was actively trying to do some of this stuff.
Yeah.
The support systems, the scapula, that kind of stuff, to support that without knowing how does that even fit within ecologically the whole ecosystem of what you do. But again, that's unfortunately, intellect does not get in the way of many decisions for players, because you look at pretty much every decision in life is driven by fear. So fear drives every decision. If I don't do that, they might think I'm stupid. If I don't move that way, I look daft. And if I don't do this, they're all fear-based coaches. If I'm not online doing this, they won't think I'm a good coach. That's all fear. And so she had a belief, a fear, which made her move that way because she thought that was the way to do it. If I didn't do this, I wouldn't keep up with the guys. I thought, how did that work out then 4 years on with a busted wrist? And you have to be blunt with these guys, because you have to, you decided to move that way, therefore you got to figure out how to resolve it. You create the issue, not me. You have to be very, you're friendly without being their friend, some of these players. So I would say that with the young guys, just those two, any device you choose to look at. How do I want to use it? What do I want from it? Mm-hmm. Guys will have just, my brother bought a pretty inexpensive launch monitor. That's just what he wants to use with his studio. He has a studio at his house. He doesn't need the most advanced launch monitor. He doesn't need it. He's happy. Yeah. He loves it. He's down in his studio every day when he gets the opportunity. Loves it, because that's what he's doing it for.
Yeah, I think that really applied to me when I purchased the system, and your software and your system was before, when I was looking at that, and I'd asked so many people their different opinions on what was out there. And obviously with Sportsbox, it was good, but that's exactly what it was for me. With Sportsbox was, in a lesson, I need a quick representation of movement. Boom. Yeah, you're 40 here. Look, boom. But the reason why I went with your system was I wanted to go back to an earlier statement you made about regurgitated food. I was sick of getting that, right? Yeah. I would get other people's learnings from 3D, and I wanted to discover myself. And I felt to do that, the only appropriate system was one of the best systems on the market. So as you said, I think asking yourself, what do you want it for first? And then really kind of getting into the data and on your own first and understanding it a little bit, and maybe what reference markers mean the most to you, I think is a really, really good way of doing it before you bring it into sessions and start showing it to players and stuff that can be a little bit. I actually had a student this morning, who's quite a regular student. He listens to a lot of podcasts, and he said, "Oh, you had Jason on last week. That was a really good podcast." I'm like, "Yeah, thanks." I'm having Mark on this morning to talk about 3D. Is there any 3D questions you would like? Like fire some at me. I might ask him. And he goes, "I don't want to know anything about 3D." I'm like, perfect. He goes, "This game's confusing enough." He said, I don't, you when we use 3D, I just give him the information, tell me what to do, and he doesn't want to know. I'm like, that's absolutely perfect. Everybody's different.
That is the idea of bookending, Steve. Do you know what? You'll get that when you get that, right?
Yeah,
do that. Right,
exactly. You mentioned earlier on a little bit of what you've been focused on with the club golfers in terms of continuity of consistency of what a lot of really good movers do. What have been some of the main kind of movement discoveries you've made this year, or have there been any major discoveries, or what have you really been focusing on in more of your, let's say, the coaching side of things and your own discoveries?
Well, nice question. So yeah, the movement stuff, I mean, that was pretty much kind of what we went through with the shoulder, the 0-0 concept, the trail elbow pelvis, bits you and I've been around in the past, the hand up and down, the rib cage pelvis compression. Sorry, so yeah, there we go. Okay, the rib cage pelvis compression, all that kind of stuff. Coaching more, a big one. I can probably give you 2 this year around coaching, which I've really, again, how I look at it is you and I record this in December. For those that listen, this is, you and I record this as we're approaching the end of the year now. You do get a little reflective as far as, okay. So this really comes from the feedback I've had from people. So this is kind of feedback shared with me that 2 areas in particular, which I really look at a lot. So the idea of kind of marginal gains is a big one for you. This whole, to give the context, that came out of British cycling in 2008, very famous guy called Dave Brailsford, wonderful, talk about performance director, fantastic. We kind of dominated cycling for many Olympics now. And kind of long with that continued from a Team GB position. So the idea of marginal gains, that was great, but what was conveniently forgotten was that was based on already being an Olympic athlete. So the idea of, if you're doing 98%, 80% things great, doing 1% extra can be gold to, the podium finish, for example. But if you're only doing 10% of things well, 11% ain't going to make much of a difference. So I'm very much into, there's not really marginal gains. It's kind of, you don't step over a pound to pick up a penny. You pick up the big rocks, not the small pebbles. So if you can do 85% of things great, that will give you enough of a buffer to then buffer and tolerate and absorb some of the areas that maybe aren't absolutely, aligned with, for example, strict physiology and some of the research. So I'm into these buffers. So I'm very much around, for most people, unless you are an absolute major champion, and for sure these 1% gains are hugely valuable. But I go back to my brother as an example, because he is a recreational 20 handicap, loves his golf. Let's do 85% of things great. And the way I try and describe it is this: it's a bit like saying, if you had 2 buckets of golf balls, Steve. So in physiology, they're called physiological buffers. A bucket for white balls, a bucket for yellow balls. The white balls are all the great behaviors in life. Light exposure, temperature exposures like cold saunas, that kind of stuff. Nutrition, hydration, all the things around our physiology which really influence our circadian rhythms, all those kind of areas. The yellow balls are the bad behaviors, late nights, poor food, artificial blue light and all that kind of stuff. If you put 1 yellow ball into a bucket full of white balls, it really wouldn't make much difference. The good stuff absorbs that 1 bad behavior. And vice versa, if you put a white ball into the bucket of yellow balls, just doing one thing well every day won't absorb won't mitigate all the bad stuff. So I try and say to most people, end your day with more white than yellow balls. If you do enough of the good stuff, you can mitigate and absorb and tolerate some of the bad stuff. No one wants to live. You've got to have some fun along the way. You can't be
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm into things for sure, but I do it with a smile. And if you approach Christmas now, chocolate's my thing. I love it, but that's my poison. You do not enjoy it. But if you do enough of the good stuff every day, you can then kind of tolerate and absorb some of the bad stuff. So for me, that's a big one to players. Don't get stressed around these 1% unless you are already doing 98% well. What are the big rocks? Where are the big opportunities rather than these small marginal gains? So again, don't step over a plan to pick up a penny. The other big one I look at a lot, we talked about bookending earlier on. That's been a bit of a thread through this already today. I like to bookend always. You'll get that when you get this. Big one for me. So we get it. The other big one I look at with players is we know within physiology, we are behavior driven, but our beliefs drive our behaviors. So the big one for me is to understand again why the player believes X to be true. It's a huge one for me because physiology is very well defined. It goes behaviors, exercise, nutrition, supplementation, interventions like a medication or a surgery or an orthotic, for example, is a third-party device. But our behaviors drive our performance, but our beliefs drive our behaviors. And the other one I look at is emotions, because our emotions drive our attention. Why you choose to look at something in the way you do is influenced by your emotions at that point in time. So I'm very much around every player, why they believe X to be true, because their behaviors are a representation of their belief systems, and just their emotions at that point in time as to why they see the world the way they do at that point in time. Examples being, you get a player coming some days, just in a good place, very happy, they're hydrated, they slept well, things are where they'd like them to be, they're just in a nice place. They could have a value on screen, that's all good, I'm happy with that. The same day or same time tomorrow, they could be tired, irritated, could have had a fallout with someone, slept poorly. They see the same value and it's a problem.
Yeah.
I said, but the value's not changed, you have. So I'm very much into that with players, really appreciating their emotions because their emotions drive their attention. I'm now seeing that as an issue where yesterday it was it's all right, it's all good, it's not a problem. And secondly, their beliefs, why they so their behaviors are belief driven. How you can look at beliefs is often look at the words they use. The words we use are the audible representation of our belief system. So I listen to, a lot to the words that people use. So when they use certain words, you now start to understand the way they see the world and why they see it that way. So listen carefully to any of the coaches out there at the language being used, because they are the audible representation of our belief systems. So for me, it's really those kind of four areas within coaching. Beliefs and emotions drive our behaviors and our attention. Look at the big rocks, not the small pebbles. Marginal gain's great if you're working with whoever, but that's very few players. Put these buffers in place within our physiology, and you can then tolerate the odd Christmas is coming. You're going to get 1 and 8 nights. Food you don't normally eat. Just do the good stuff every day. It's like the old I'm showing the old Ready Brek man from way back. They have this glow around him. You've got this kind of tolerance. You can absorb all the nonsense because you've got this kind of protective shield in some ways. And the importance of bookending. Don't get lost on the stuff in the middle.
Yeah.
Oh, Steve, you to be good at this. The way I describe bookending, it's a bit like Everest. We all have our own definition of Everest. My brother might be to break 85. Someone might be to win the Open. Okay, everyone defines Everest differently. Everest is quite overwhelming for some. It's almost unrealistic. How do I climb Everest? For me, a much nicer approach is what's the next step needed to climb Everest? What do I need to do now and today to be a step closer to climbing Everest? And that's a lot more realistic. So I'm very much around that with players. What's the next step needed rather than how do I climb Everest?
Yeah, I like that. There's
a wonderful book by a guy called Jim Quick called Limitless, which I'd encourage anyone to read in coaching. Great book. One of my favorite books. And Jim Quick talks about what's called PE and the 3 S's. Have good purpose, have good energy, and take small, simple steps. And I love that. What's your purpose today? Do it with great energy and just take small, simple steps.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good learnings this year. Okay. We have up your system here. So we're going to look at a few traces in your 3D system. Let's go through let's have a look at the trail elbow. Now, in preference to look at trail elbow, obviously player dependent. We have a face-on perspective. We can always look at it from down the line. And I think we'll move to the down the line perspective just because a lot of coaches would be looking at trail elbow from there. what are we normally seeing when we see really, really good or efficient, good movement from that trail elbow from this player here?
Yeah, I mean, typically you probably wouldn't see that behavior where the elbow, again, allowing for all things being well in backswing. So allowing for backswing where you'd like it to be. Somewhat closely matched would be the elbow path, hip hook underneath, slightly, but not to that scale.
Yeah.
And then if you look at it post impact, I wouldn't then move above its path in through swing relative to its path in backswing. So that's a very good example of perhaps an unhelpful and somewhat problematic approach. It hooks underneath in transition and moves on top post impact.
So generally speaking, if we were kind of seeing a player, if we went back to the very, very start, player that we would maybe look and go, right, that's, efficient movement of that trail elbow. As they would start down, we would see that trace of that trail elbow kind of move more down along a similar path, let's say, as they work down.
Underneath, but aligned with the path I went back on.
Okay,
we can actually use this, to actually thread this together nicely, this discussion. If you can go face on for me. And then from those, the drop-down menu, at the very bottom is the trail elbow in pelvis path. We can actually look at that. And then go back to your address and just clear those existing paths on them. Now just play through backswing. So you'll see both of those paths there, the path of the pelvis, which is the small, and then that kind of C shape is the path of the elbow. Just start to kind of move down for me, kind of frame by frame. Just start to move into downswing. And just kind of stop now. Just clear the path so the user doesn't get, or the viewer doesn't get completely kind of now to come into impact. I want to look at a lot now. If you just come down to impact for me, you'll see the elbow would absolutely align with, in a good example, impact the middle of the pelvis, which it's a little bit below, but almost does. So
very close. Yeah,
matches is kind of almost touch. In really established players, those lines will touch.
No, that's a beautiful representation. I really like that. Very, very good. And you were mentioning earlier on about the lead shoulder too. So if we kind of use that same player, we'll just bring them back to set up here and just zoom out a little bit. Same principle. We're looking at that lead shoulder. You're going to see that red line represent backswing. And then as through swing.
You come in, it doesn't really then, it kind of goes up and above it. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think I know who this player is based on that file, but yeah, that's a good example. It hooks underneath, but never really goes ahead of.
Yeah.
Its start position and an impact is above and on top of its start position. Fantastic examples. That's a lovely example there.
And then when you're looking at maybe trail shoulder movement, because again, these are all the kind of the areas that, when you're looking at players, for a lot of players, we won't go that side, for a lot of players and coaches, they're looking at that trail side. And, I've heard you reference this before about perhaps that trail elbow, that trail arm, that trail wrist being the most influential segment in the golf swing because it goes through the widest range of motion versus, say, the lead side. So if we were looking at that trail shoulder.
I mean, a nice one to show you. Yeah, sorry, Stephen.
No, please, if you have a better suggestion, sorry.
And it's because we kind of looked at the lead shoulder, we've looked at the trail elbow pelvis, which I look at a lot, those two plots. You can display the trail shoulder path for me now. Not one I look at a lot with players. Just move this player through backswing.
Come back to setup.
Just kind of probably a slight delay. Just kind of move that player through backswing for me. So what I look at is, can you, using the drawing line, take a straight line down from the start position of that. So the start position, the beginning of the trace, just draw a straight line.
Straight down?
That's about right. Stop there. Great. So what I look at a lot then is, at an impact, is that trace ahead of that start position. So the rotation through that, horsey speaking, that rib cage and that trail, when they get kind of this stuff and they get stuck behind it, that they never get back. So this is a good example because I know what this player was doing. This is actually their issue. See how it doesn't get back ahead of its start position.
Yes.
So that would then display like, the pelvis often thrust forward. They get lots of kind of lateral. They get very overactive through hand and wrist, that kind of stuff, which is the
fantastic.
So you start to see these connections, these threads now. So I would look at a lot with players that trail shoulder would get forward of through its rotation and ahead of in those somewhat kind of colloquial definitions relative to its start position.
That's amazing. Okay, we got one more question, and this is kind of, it's not actually a question. I'm just going to make a statement and then you're going to talk about it.
Thanks very much.
I wanted to read out the headings. You have a website membership, Bull 3D Academy, which is probably, and I'm not just saying that because you're here. I've said this to many people, and people I've met that, I was with Butch Harmon a couple of weeks ago, and there happened to be some other coaches there, and I mentioned to them that this is the best learning site that you can sign up to as a coach. So we'll put the website on, but I digress. So on that website, you have different headings, so different topics that you can learn from. And I just want to just go through them. And I know this might sound a bit pedantic to other people, but there's a point to this. So junior development, human performance, physiotherapy drills, skill acquisition, movement sequences, anatomy tutorials, performance and development. I haven't even mentioned the golf swingers yet. Now we talk about, there is other swing drills, 3D swing tutorials, and that tour player research, guest interviews, etc. But we nearly get to 7 headings that have nothing to do, well, I shouldn't say nothing to do, but are not explicitly labeling golf swing movement. Why is that so important to you? And what frames that concept, that outlay? Because I could imagine a coach that does 3D that is that way inclined, creating a membership and it being 3D backswing, 3D downswing, 3D impact, so something along those lines. And maybe I'm labeling people in the wrong way. But the thing that strikes me every single time I talk to you and every single time I go on that website is the wholeness of your approach. And even when you're talking about the learnings that you've gone through and coaching learnings, there was the little mention of the swing stuff, the technique, but it was more about the human being and how they learn in their process. So I just wanted to kind of get your opinion on that, like in terms of that layout and how that came about and why that's so important.
Well, no one's ever actually asked me that question before, Steve, so thank you for that. Kind of 2 things, really. That's actually made me think, which is great. I think you look at, for me, movement is the truest form of expression. It's how we express ourselves as people through the way we move. Dance, martial arts, music. Look at the great musicians. I mean, very few musicians, unless you are the most stoic bassist. You look at, they're so expressive. I mean, they become the guitar. They become the drumstick. They become they become the instrument. I think so. Movements are truest form of expression. It's how we express ourselves. So when we start to look at it that way, we are these expressive performers. I mean, look at over half of our brain, as you know from you've heard me say in the past, is allocated to movement and vision. So that our history, our brain's evolution reveals much of our history that is designed to move. So we are these very expressive movers. When you actually look at then what influences expression, some of the areas are those which you look at there. So I've never actually thought about that. I mean, when the academy was originally designed during the March of 2020, with like the first, I can tell the story behind the academy another time. It was designed to last about 2 weeks to give the guys something to look at, and that was the honest answer. I thought, okay, I'll do it for a month just before we kind of get back, and I'll make continue because I hugely enjoy it. That was so organic to me. When I look at how players perform, and we look to really develop players, what's behind it? Well, it's all these areas. So it was really that. I mean, and that's how when you look at how these players perform, Shane Lowry again clearly expresses his personality in the way he moves. And the way he behaves in a good way. Then you look at the emotion of the Ryder Cup, what it means to him to be in that Ryder Cup team is clearly, that's no one's that good an actor to express the way Shane Lowry does. Clearly,
yeah,
and that you have to admire. That's his personality. And Luke Donald is equally, the way he moves is an expression of his personality, which is probably why Donald and Shane Lowry got on so well, because they're so different. But there's a common thread that connects them, and their aspiration to win. Donald is much more stoic, does his thing. Lowry is clearly very, very much more emotive in a good way. So it was really that, Steve. We look at what are we? We are these expressive humans. It's like how we express. We actually learned to dance way before we learned to speak. So you go back to the evolution of speech. We communicate through movement, dance. You look at, say, which is still in some of these indigenous races. You go to say Pacific Islands or some tribes now, they still communicate via dance. And you look at, say, I don't want to say war dances. I mean, if that comes across in a bad way, I apologize. But they have these dances, these ceremonial, dances that they have to celebrate often seasons and gratitude, for example, which is often look at, say, that the haka and rugby. So they communicate the All Blacks via the haka. That's their ceremonial challenge they lay down to the opposing team. For those that don't know rugby, the haka is a very famous dance. So they communicate by dance. So we are these expressive people, and movements how we express typically, whether it be through how you decide to look at, the good guitarists bend their necks on the guitars because they express so well. The good drummers, I mean, there's a very famous story about Ayrton Senna. Every time he raced in an F1 car, the car never quite performed the same because he took it so much to beyond its limits almost. The car was never quite drivable again because he expressed himself through his driving. So we are expressing. So these are influences, and these are, honestly, I could probably put, if I thought very quickly, 4 or 5 more in very quickly now. Mm-hmm. That I can add in, and you've probably given me an idea there actually, that around expression. So for me, it's that. I mean, that's my big driver still. And this is, you can put it about players now, and anyone. I'll put it the first question I ask any player or any coaches. What's your motivation and why you're motivated that way? Once we understand what motivates the guy to come in, the first guy I saw this morning come and see me, and why is he motivated that way? Then you can start to help someone. So I'm always mindful of that. What's your motivation? Why are you motivated that way? The aspirations you have, the beliefs you have, why you're here, what you're doing it for, that kind of stuff, which is a big one for me. Then you can really start to help and understand. But it's really based around that. It's how we express. And movement is our truest form of expression.
Perfect answer. Absolutely perfect. All right, mate. Thank you so much. I know you're pressed for time today, so I really appreciate you and everything you do, and obviously our close friendship and everything you do for me. But as I said, I meant that honestly and truly. Trust me, I've been through enough certifications, educations as I've made my journey through the golf sphere. Your website, your mentorship, your membership is by far and away the best source of information for any golf coach, even club players out there, if you want to learn more about the golf swing. So I can't recommend it enough. We'll put the link in the bios. And just if people want to follow you on Instagram, it's just Bull 3D. Isn't that it?
Bull 3D Academy, I think it is.
It is Bull 3D Academy. My apologies. But definitely a good follower there, because you love the social media. You can't keep you off the social media. All right, mate.
I kind of drop in, drop out. I'm most and I get, I get it. I judge no one. Who am I to judge anyone? And I mean that seriously. I'm trying to figure me out still, and other people. And I get why people need to use it. I mean, and I really appreciate. And do you know what? That's why they do very well, and good for them. But I'm not a prolific poster, but hopefully when I do post, there's a little bit of meaning behind it. But I mean, Steve, thank you. I mean, you're always very welcome. Always love speaking to you. Happy to help in any way, and always very grateful for the opportunity to just to kind of share what's in my head, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And to come out after Jason Sutton, a week after Jason Sutton, like, you must feel honored, but we won't get into that.
How do you follow the Beatles in life?
Right, no, it's crazy, right? Mark, thank you very much, mate.
I feel like I just followed Alex Ferguson into Manchester United now. No chance. People don't take the cat, but he is Alex Ferguson.
Okay, I'm not sure he'll get the reference. He's a Carolina Panthers fan, so they're not used to success. But
tell him how do you follow the Beatles then? I'm the kind of guy that comes on next.
Okay, perfect. All right, mate. Thank you so much.
Have a great Christmas, Steve. See you soon.
Right, cheers, man. Thanks.
Bye.
All right, so that wraps up another episode, and huge thank you to Dr. Mark Bull for coming on the show, and thanks for his time and for being so open and honest with his thoughts, beliefs, and experiences. And I cannot encourage you enough to sign up to either Mark's website, which is bull3dacademy.com, or follow him on Instagram at bull3dacademy. The experience on either of those platforms will help you grow as a coach, player, and a person. Big thank you to you, the listeners out there, as without you listening and downloading these podcasts, there wouldn't be a show. And I really appreciate the support and the feedback. And just a reminder, if you do enjoy it, please make sure to rate the show on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. As always, if you want to work with myself in person or online, or indeed have any questions on golf or the podcast, You can contact me on Instagram at SteveMooreGolf or through the website SteveMooreGolf.com. Finally, for your own game, don't forget, work hard, work diligently, but most importantly, work smart, and we'll talk to you again soon. Cheers.